So I want you to think about what you would do in the same situation, and if your social anxiety would get in the way. But you're walking around Golden Gai in Japan. Golden Gai, also known as Golden Town, is this area concentrated with many bars that were constructed like 50, 70, maybe even 100 years ago, where people from all around the world congregate to drink and to experience Japanese culture. And the reason it's so popular is because it's fairly easy to use English here, but also get an authentic Japanese experience. So one Friday night, I ended up going to Golden Gai. One of the first bars that I saw had nobody in it, so I decided to sit myself down. I'm having myself a drink, and then in comes a guy. He's wearing a flannel. He kind of has, long hair like mine. He looks rather humble. So I look at him, and I'm like, all right, I got to introduce myself. So I say, my name's Tristan. It's nice to meet you. And he says, hey, I'm Oscar. And so immediately, as an American, I'm like, so what's your profession? What do you do? I'm a musician and a YouTuber. To which he says, oh, actually, I do social media as well. And I'm like, kind of curious. So I'm like, oh, okay, so what do you do? He's like, oh, I do a cooking channel called La Capitale. And so I look it up on my phone, and 9.49 million subscribers. And so you got to really imagine what it was like for me in that moment. So put things in perspective, Joe Rogan has about 13, 14 million subscribers, I believe. Jordan Peterson has 7.55 million. So you gotta really put yourself in my shoes. I'm essentially talking to somebody with the same amount of success, at least in terms of numbers, as Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan. I've never heard of the guy before, but he's in the bar, we're having a one-to-one, and he seems like he's genuinely interested in having a conversation. So I'm like, okay, I have to do this now. And as a curious individual who's interested in being the best version of himself, I'm like, okay, I have to ask this guy some questions, because usually you don't get to talk to people who are so successful. You don't get to pry open their brain and get advice from them directly. So in a situation like that, what do you do? Well, I'll tell you exactly what I was thinking, and I could break it down into 3 tips. The first tip is to always treat people like they are people. No matter how famous they are. A good example of this, even for me, is I am a huge, huge Nirvana fan.
It's a taser? It electrocutes people? Yeah.
Oh, what's... I'm a huge Beatles fan. How could you tell?
Come on, you cunts.
And so it's really easy to think of these people as figures similar to like a character in a video game. Someone who's not really real. They're like bigger than real. They're like these abstract figures that you can almost consider idols of worship depending on the person you are. And so if you meet someone that famous, it's easy to just immediately put that person into that category. Like, wow, famous, successful, nothing like me. I need to really respect this person and put them above me. But you don't need to do that. In fact, you should not do that the first time you talk to someone really successful. What you need to do is remember that they are just like you. Maybe at some point in their lives, unless they were born into a famous family, they were not successful, they were not famous, and they had a time in their life when they had to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, like an existential crisis, for example. Most of the time, people like that don't get to have conversations that are very genuine, at least genuine enough where it feels like they get to really talk about what they love. And instead, interviewers, if you look at people like Kurt Cobain or John Lennon, interviewers often ask only about the success, the superficial aspects of, their music. A good example would be, take this interview of Kurt Cobain talking about Nevermind.
Why did you entitle it? Why did you entitle the album Nevermind?
I don't know. So I could brush off the question. Forget it. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Any specific?
Now take this interview with Joe Savage in 1993.
Your parents
high school.
Split up young?
Yeah, when I was 7.
And do you remember anything about that?
Yeah, I remember feeling ashamed for some reason. I was ashamed of my parents I couldn't face some of my friends at school anymore because I desperately wanted to have the classic typical family, mother, father. I wanted that security.
Step 2, ask the right questions. If you notice, these 2 interviews are completely different because in one, Kurt is being asked questions about the album, but he's not really being asked anything beyond the superficiality of said album. Why is it called Nevermind? Nevermind. That's why. he's kind of being sarcastic because there's no real effort to have a rapport with Kurt Cobain. Whereas in the Joe Savage interview, he's being asked questions about his family, his life, his background, the reasons that he was inspired to do music. And so when I was talking to Oscar of La Capitale, I thought to myself, well, this guy is probably going to be more successful than 99.9% of people who ever live, and everyone is vying for the same kind of success. He probably gets questions like, oh, well, how much money do you make? Or, what is it like to be so famous? What is it like to get, et cetera, all the time. And I think, well, I want to ask something that he's never been asked before, but not just for the sake of the novelty of the question. I want to know more about this guy. So I started by opening up about myself. I told him that I'm a small town kid from Milwaukee, and that the reason I ended up coming to Japan, because he asked about why I was here, the reason I came to Japan was because I was dejected, I was fed up with American politics, and I wanted to experience something new out of the depression that I had there. And he ends up opening up to me and says, well, when I was 25 years old, I had a similar experience with depression myself. I was working, I quit my job, and I didn't really know what to do, so I moved to the United States to find opportunity. And then lo and behold, he became the YouTube channel what he is now. And it's amazing. Like, wow. I told him a story about myself, and he tried to relate to me, and I felt very humbled by that. Like, wow. As in, somebody who is clearly rocking their game, making cooking videos and appealing to a large audience, had an experience like mine, and we were able to bond over that. And I didn't even know the guy for longer than maybe 15 minutes at that point. And so it's good to remember it's good to keep in mind that the people you're talking to, no matter how successful they are, they share the same brain chemistry, they're the same species as you, they're not gods. You just need to learn how to talk to them as though they're just a normal stranger. And then look at their exploits as something that, is no more than a conversation piece, if you will. Now, you don't want to be a bag, be like, while you might be famous, I got my cool stuff too. You don't want to do any like the comparison stuff. But you want to do is just get them to talk about themselves. And then I always think about, what am I going to learn from this person? And what Oscar essentially told me is about, his YouTube channel, a little bit about his model, but, I wasn't even really asking about this. We just kind of had a normal conversation like two people, and then occasionally when it came up, a kernel of truth, a kernel of wisdom came up about his career, and I was very humbled by that. You don't want to ask dumb questions, because what immediately that does is it tells the person that, one, you're looking up to them, and two, that you're probably only thinking of this person as a means to an end to help yourself. You have to remember that all conversations are between two people, and you should give them the chance to talk about them to you. And if you consider it within that context, then the conversation will flow like you're talking to any other guy. So far, treat them like a human being. Ask the right questions, and finally, make connections. Now, how do you do this? You don't want to be too direct about it like before. Like, how many followers do you have? Hey, can I have your Instagram? Like, sometimes that works, but for somebody who's socially anxious and kind of introverted like me, I feel like that it's a little cringy, and I prefer to be like, hey, do you have an Instagram? Would you mind if I DM'd you to ask a couple of questions if you ever have the time? Something really tactful like that. You want to know more about this person, and you're asking like, hey, you are very successful, and I would like to be successful myself. And in the journey in becoming that, I'd like to keep in contact. If you kind of frame it like that, the person, they might give you a chance. They might not give you a chance. In this case, we did exchange social media, but I didn't get a follow back from him, and I know, maybe kind of disappointing, but I still had an excellent conversation with this guy, and regardless of whether or not we're friends after the fact, I got to have a brilliant discussion with an individual who put in a lot of work to be as successful as he is now. And I feel that if we were more open to talking to those who are more successful than us, and just to ask questions, inquire about them, but not in a way that only helps us, but to let them speak about themselves, we would be much wiser. I invite you guys to ask more questions and to treat people who are more successful than you like normal people. Don't think about the hierarchy, and really just have a little balls and pretend like you're talking to a friend. If they don't like it, if they have a negative reaction to that, speak more about them as a person. As some of us say, don't meet your heroes. I genuinely believe that by being more outgoing and being forthright about your intentions and being sincere, you will get results, and you will benefit from a kind of wisdom that you wouldn't get otherwise. And so, all of you guys who are struggling with talking to folks now, If that happens to you, if it's a college professor, a person giving a lecture, I invite you to go try. Otherwise, cheers. Hey, thanks for tuning into the Tantris Humble channel. Welcome to my little studio space. I've been working a little bit harder on editing and trying to make it a bit more sleek and digestible for people, because I know that standing in front of a camera for 10 minutes can get a little drab at times. So if you enjoyed that, I invite you to join our little Discord server where we watch movies, talk, and share our thoughts about various things. Otherwise, you can find me on Instagram and other social media that I will leave in the description below. So thank you so much again, and I hope to see you sometime soon. So cheers!